3 gunshots. Inside the Don's own house. Inside the one place in the city no one was supposed to dare. In a mansion built to make the world feel far away, the marble, the glass, the armed perimeter, the silence purchased at enormous cost. 3 gunshots rang out like a verdict. Sharp. Final. Impossible. By the time Don Valerius crossed the foyer, his pistol drawn, his empire already mobilizing around him, it was done. The family's maid lay on the floor in a spreading pool of her own blood. Beneath her, shielded by her body, protected by her sacrifice, his 10-year-old son stared at the ceiling and said nothing at all. In 30 years of power, Valerius had never felt powerless. Until that moment. But to understand what those 3 shots destroyed, and what they would eventually build, you have to understand the world they were fired into. Don Valerius didn't walk into a room. He arrived. There was a stillness that preceded him, a held breath, a straightening of spines, a silence that spread like a cold front. Men who had broken other men looked at the floor when he passed, not out of weakness, out of survival. He had built his empire the way a surgeon operates, with precision, patience, and zero sentiment. Every decision was clean. Every order was final. 30 years at the top of the city's criminal hierarchy, and he had never once flinched. But power has its edges, and the people who live closest to those edges, not the soldiers, not the capos, but the ones who fill the quiet spaces between the violence, those are the people who know a man's true shape. Elena knew his shape better than anyone. She had come to work for the family when she was still a young woman. She was the family's maid. But that word was a small container for something that didn't fit inside it. For 20 years, she moved through the mansion like the tide, steady, reliable, noticed only when she wasn't there. She knew the Don kept a faded photograph of his late wife behind the false back of his desk drawer. She knew which floors creaked at night, and she knew Leo. The boy had come into the world without a mother and grown up in the shadow of a father who loved him in the only way he knew. With money, with protection, with ambition aimed like a weapon at his son's future. Valerius gave Leo everything except the one thing the boy needed most. A soft place to land. Elena was that place. She taught him the names of the birds in the garden. She sat beside his bed when nightmares came. And in a house full of men with guns and hard faces, nightmares came often. While his father taught him about power, Elena taught him about people, about kindness, about the quiet courage it takes to be decent in a world that rewards cruelty. Everyone from the lowest foot soldier to Ricardo, the Don's underboss, his oldest confidant, knew what she meant to this family. There was an unspoken rule. You don't touch the maid. She was sacred. Protected by a code older than the organization itself. But codes only hold as long as the people who wrote them do. And someone had decided to rewrite the rules. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Pale sky, light breeze, the garden fragrant after a morning rain. Elena and Leo were coming back from their walk among the flower beds. Leo was 10 years old, small for his age, with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes. He was holding a wildflower he'd pulled from near the stone wall, a small purple thing, slightly crooked, the kind of flower that shouldn't have survived there but did anyway. He was going to give it to Elena. She was laughing at something he'd said. Real laughter. Unguarded. Warm. That's when the doors burst open. 2 men. Ski masks. Weapons raised. Fast and deliberate, no wasted motion. They hadn't come through the main gate. The security breach was surgical. Internal. They didn't look at the paintings. They didn't look at the corridor ahead. They looked directly at Elena. She saw it in their eyes before they raised the guns higher. The locked-in certainty of men who have already made a decision. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She shoved Leo behind her, one hard thrust that sent the boy stumbling into the wall. She turned herself into a wall between them, arms slightly out, chin up. The first shot cracked like a whip. Elena gasped. The bullet caught her shoulder and spun her half sideways. She didn't fall. She locked her knees, breathing through the shock, eyes wide and blazing. The second shot came 2 seconds later. This one hit lower. She folded. A broken guttural sound escaped her. Not a scream. Something smaller, more honest than a scream. She grabbed the doorframe and failed. Her knees hit the marble. The third shot came as she was already falling. She twisted as she went down. Even then, even in that moment, making sure her body covered Leo completely. She hit the floor and the world went white at the edges. Then, silence. The two men were gone. The heavy door drifted shut behind them. The only sounds were the distant echo of retreating footsteps, the bitter smell of gunpowder, and the faint broken rhythm of Elena's breathing. Leo was beneath her, curled into himself, eyes open, completely still. He was unhurt. Don Valerius was in his study when the shots rang out. He knew the sound, 30 years inside it. But something in his body recognized immediately that this was wrong. Not the sound itself, but its location. His home, his walls. An impossibility. He was moving before conscious thought caught up. Pistol in hand, face locked in the blankness of a man trained not to feel until the situation is contained. He came through the study door and stopped. His men were scrambling, guards pulling into position, radios crackling, the perimeter going to full lockdown. But none of it registered. He saw Elena on the floor, the blood spreading beneath her, and half hidden under her, the small, still form of his son. Something tore loose inside him. Leo. The word came out raw, low, not the voice of a Don, the voice of a father. He crossed the foyer in seconds and dropped to his knees. His hands that had signed death warrants with the steadiness of a chess player, were trembling as he rolled Elena gently onto her side. She was pale. The color had left her like water draining from a basin. Beneath her, Leo lay curled tight as a fist, one hand still gripping the small purple wildflower, now crushed. Breathing, no wounds, no blood that was his, but his eyes were somewhere far from here. Leo. Valerius touched the boy's face. Look at me. Are you hurt? Nothing. Leo stared past him, already gone somewhere inside himself. Ricardo appeared at the Don's side. Boss, medical team is already rolling, 30 seconds out. We've sealed the estate, every exit. Valerius barely heard him. The private medical team arrived, trauma surgeons under permanent contract. They moved with controlled urgency. The lead surgeon assessed the wounds and looked up. 3 GSWs, 2 to the torso, 1 shoulder. She's critical. We need to move her to the surgical suite now. A pause. I won't mislead you about the odds. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Valerius stood. His jaw tightened. The grief that had cracked open closed back over. Pushed under, behind the cold armor that had kept him alive for 30 years. He turned to Ricardo. The Falcones, he said. His voice had dropped to a temperature just above 0. This has their signature. Bold, brazen, right in the heart of us. He looked at Ricardo steadily. I want every one of their soldiers pulled from their beds. I want their operations burned to ash. I want Marco Falcone's head before the sun comes up. Understood? Ricardo met his eyes. Consider it done, boss. He turned and walked. Not ran, walked, back toward the war room. Valerius looked down at his son one more time. Leo hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, still gripping the crushed wildflower, staring at the blood-stained marble where Elena had lain. And the boy was somewhere unreachable, locked behind glass, and Don Valerius, who could unlock anything, had no key for this. Hours passed like slow water. The mansion hummed with controlled chaos. Phones rang. Men moved through corridors in tight pairs. From the city below, 2 Falcone-owned warehouses sent smoke into the night sky. And in the West Wing, Leo sat alone on the edge of his bed. A child psychologist had been brought in. She tried for 45 minutes. She got nothing. Leo looked through her. He held the carved wooden bird Elena had given him and stared at the floor. When the psychologist appeared in the corridor, her face said everything her composure tried not to. Valerius dismissed her himself. But when he walked into that room and saw his son, small, rigid, a 10-year-old carrying something no child should carry, the certainty he walked in with faltered. Leo. He kept his voice steady. I need to know what you saw, who they were. It's for Elena. Nothing. Valerius sat on the edge of the bed. He was a man who got answers, who had never, in 30 years, encountered a silence he couldn't break. This 10-year-old was unmovable. He stood, moved to the window, looked at the dark gardens without seeing them. In the security hub 2 floors down, Marco was doing something different from everyone else. While Ricardo had turned the organization outward, all hammer, no scalpel, Marco was watching the surveillance footage, over and over, forward and back. Something was wrong. Professional operators, clean breach. But their behavior was illogical. The boy had been right there. No security. Separated from his guard. Taking Leo would have been the strategic masterpiece of a generation. It would have paralyzed Valerius completely. They didn't even look at him. Every shot, every second in that foyer was aimed at Elena. Even the third shot, fired as she was already falling, was not tactical. It was the shot of a man making absolutely sure. Marco went to find Ricardo. The attack doesn't track, he said, keeping his voice low. A Falcone operation targets the air. Always. These men walked past Leo like he was furniture. Ricardo crossed his arms. The maid threw herself in the way. Maybe they lost their shot. 3 shots, Marco said. Plenty of opportunity. They chose not to take it. He paused. This was an execution of Elena specifically. The boy was a witness, not a target. Ricardo shrugged it off. You're overthinking a straightforward hit. Marco looked at him for a moment. Something in the quickness of the dismissal registered. Not loudly, just a small, cold note. He went to Valerius. Don, he said. I've watched the tapes 4 times. The target was never Leo. He measured his next words carefully. The breach was too clean, too specific. Nobody operates that precisely without inside help. The real question is, who would want Elena dead? And what did she know? The words settled into the room like fog. Valerius stared at his consigliere. Marco had never been wrong when it mattered. A nurse appeared at the end of the corridor. Don Valerius. Elena is stable, but she hasn't regained consciousness. A pause. The surgeon says you should be prepared for different outcomes. He looked from the nurse to Marco, then down the corridor toward his son's room. He needed the truth. And there was only one person who might have it. It was past midnight when Valerius walked back to Leo's room. The mansion was quieter now. The frantic energy of the first hours had settled into something heavier. The weight of a house, waiting for news it might not be able to bear. He pushed the door open gently. Leo had moved from the bed. He was on the floor near the window, kneeling on the rug, not looking outside but at his own reflection in the dark glass. A small pale boy staring at himself. In the reflection, he saw his father appear in the doorway. Neither of them spoke. Valerius walked in. He lowered himself to the floor. Slowly, with the deliberateness of a man unaccustomed to descending, in any sense. He knelt beside his son and looked at their reflections in the dark window. Father and son, two ghosts in glass. "They say she may not wake up," Valerius said. His voice was quiet, no authority in it, nothing of the dawn, just a man delivering the hardest kind of news. "They say we need to prepare ourselves." Leo's shoulders drew in. A small tremor moved through him. "I need to know who did this to her, Leo." Valerius kept his eyes on their reflection. "Not for me. Not for the family. For her. She put her body in front of yours. After 20 years of giving this family everything she had, she gave the last thing, too." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the small purple wildflower, retrieved from the foyer, crushed but still whole. He held it out. "You picked this for her." Leo looked at the flower. Something cracked in his face. A single tear broke loose and traveled down his cheek. Then another. And then the dam came down completely. Not explosive, not loud, but a quiet, devastating flood. Valerius reached out. Not as a Don, as a father. Awkward with the gesture, but reaching. He pulled his son close, and Leo collapsed against him entirely, his small frame shaking with sobs. Valerius held him. He rocked him gently and said nothing, because there were no words for this, and for once he was wise enough to know it. The sobs slowed, the breathing steadied. Leo pulled back and wiped his face. He looked up at his father. In his eyes was something old and painful, a knowledge a 10-year-old shouldn't have to carry. "It wasn't for me," Leo whispered. Valerius frowned. "What wasn't?" "The men. The guns." Leo's voice was hoarse but steadying. "They weren't there for me. They wanted her. Only her." The target wasn't Leo. "How do you know that, son? What did you see?" Valerius kept his voice even, careful, like a man approaching something that might startle. Leo turned the wooden bird over and over in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow, the voice of someone reciting something they've memorized to keep it safe. "Elena told me a secret a long time ago, when I was little." A pause. "She made me promise not to tell. She called it a grown-up secret. A sad story from before I was born." Valerius waited. The night waited. "She said her real name wasn't Elena." Leo looked up at his father. "She said her name was Eliana Falcone." The name hit Valerius like a fist to the throat. Falcone, his enemies, a Falcone, under his roof, for 20 years. "She had a brother," Leo continued. "His name was Matteo. He worked for you, a long time ago, but people said he was a traitor, a spy." Leo's eyes held his father's. "You had him dealt with." The blood in Valerius's veins turned to ice. Matteo Falcone. The name surfaced like something rising from deep water. A young soldier who had switched sides, pledged himself, seemed eager to prove his loyalty. Then the whispers started. Informant. Mole. The evidence had been convincing. Valerius had given the order the same way he gave every order, without hesitation. He had never known Matteo had a sister. "Elena said it wasn't true," Leo said. His voice dropped. "She said Matteo was loyal to you. Really loyal. She said someone else inside your family was the real traitor. And that person framed Matteo to protect themselves." A pause. "She came to work here because she had no one left. You had taken her last person, and she wanted to be close to what remained of him." The room tilted on its axis. 20 years. In his house. Not as a spy, but as a woman with nowhere else to go, devoted to the family of the man who had ordered her brother's death. She had kept that secret inside her chest through 2 decades, never once letting it surface. and now someone had come to silence it forever. The math was brutal. The breach had been professional. The war order had come instantly, from the one person who had been present for all of it. The same man who helped handle Matteo Falcone. The same man first to the foyer, first to push Valerius's rage toward an enemy that had nothing to do with this. There was only one name. Valerius looked at his son. The boy looked back with the full weight of what he'd just handed over. "You did the right thing," Valerius told him, low, certain. Leo nodded once, then looked back at his reflection. The small lonely boy on the other side of the glass. Valerius rose. He walked out with the quiet purpose of a man who has found his target. He found Ricardo in the war room. Monitors, radios, maps pinned to boards. Ricardo at the center, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the look of a commander mid-operation. A slight smile, the energy of a man who has been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of night. "Boss, good timing. We've got 2 Falcone captains in custody. By morning, we can—" "Stop." Quiet. But the room stopped. "Send the men out." The room cleared in seconds. The door closed. Just the 2 of them now. 30 years of partnership compressed into a silence with nowhere comfortable to go. "Call everything off," Valerius said. Ricardo's expression shifted. Confusion over something working hard not to look like fear. "Boss, I don't understand. After what they did. After Elena. The Falcones didn't do it." Silence. Ricardo opened his mouth. Closed it. "Boss, the breach. The attack. Who else would dare?" "Matteo Falcone," Valerius said. Each word precise. "Tell me what you remember." A beat. Half a second of something moving behind Ricardo's eyes. He recovered fast. He was always fast. "Vaguely. A young soldier. Informant, they said. We took care of it. That was a long time ago. What does that have to do?" "He had a sister," Valerius said. His voice completely level, almost gentle. "Her name was Eliana. For the last 20 years we've been calling her Elena." The mask came down. Not dramatically, just sudden absence. All of Ricardo's performance fell away at once, leaving something underneath that was older and smaller and scared. In that flash, Valerius had everything he needed. "You knew," Valerius said. Ricardo's jaw tightened. "I found out a few months ago. Because I was going to tell you, boss. I was waiting for the right moment." The right moment. A sound that was not quite a laugh, dry as stone. "Or the right opportunity." She was a loose end, Ricardo. One that traced directly back to you. "She was a Falcone in your house." Ricardo's voice cracked upward. "An enemy in the center of everything, a ticking clock. I was protecting the family. You were protecting yourself." The truth of it filled the room. It was Ricardo who had been the real informant. Matteo Falcone had discovered it, so Ricardo had framed him, manufactured evidence, pushed Valerius to act fast, buried a loyal man, built his entire career on that grave. And when he found Elena's identity months ago, he hadn't told his boss. He had arranged her death to ignite a war, one that would consume the city and turn every trail back to him to ash. "You framed an innocent man," Valerius said. "You let me order his death. You let me carry that. For 30 years. He stepped forward. Ricardo held his ground, but his shoulders drew back. "You brought a war to my door to cover a crime from 3 decades ago. You shot Elena, who has not once, in 20 years, done a single thing to harm this family, in front of my son." He stopped. 4 feet between them, an entire world. "You told me it was for the family." Valerius's voice went quiet in a way far worse than shouting. "You are not family. You are a man who built himself a throne on someone else's grave and spent 30 years hoping no one would ever look at the foundation." He turned away. "Marco?" The consigliere appeared at the door. "Take him to the quiet room. Settle it." Ricardo's bravado collapsed entirely. "Val, boss, 30 years. We built this together." Valerius paused, turned his head slightly, not fully back. "Yes," he said. The grief in his voice was the most terrifying thing in the room. "And you destroyed it all." He walked out. The door closed. The mansion swallowed the silence. In the quiet aftermath, the city held its breath. The war that had been primed to erupt simply didn't. To the Falcone family, it was bewildering. A sudden de-escalation from a man known for never retreating. They would spend years wondering. They would never learn the truth. Ricardo was erased. Not dramatically. He simply ceased to exist. The way a candle ceases when you press your fingers together. His name was not spoken after that night. Marco stepped into the gap. The organization stabilized. And in the West Wing, a heart monitor beeped its steady, stubborn rhythm. Against everything the surgeon had suggested preparing for, Elena fought her way back. Slow. Entirely consistent with who she was. A woman who had spent 20 years staying decent inside a world built on indecency. She was not going to be stopped by 3 bullets. She was not going to let Leo face this without her. Valerius was there when she first opened her eyes. He had maintained the vigil personally, sleeping in a chair in the corridor, turning away every suggestion that it was unnecessary. When she finally looked at him, he said the only thing that was true. "I'm sorry." It was insufficient. He knew it. Elena looked at him for a long moment, her face carrying everything she'd carried for 2 decades. Then she nodded. Once. Not forgiveness, exactly. Something more adult. An acknowledgement that the accounting was complicated, that 2 people could have caused each other harm and still choose to sit in the same room. He changed in the months that followed. Slowly. The way real things change. Incrementally. Imperfectly. He started showing up, not to teach Leo about power, just to be there. They walked in the gardens in the evenings. Sometimes Leo talked and his father listened. Sometimes they were quiet together in a way that finally felt comfortable. Once, on a cool Saturday morning, Leo took his father's hand. Valerius let him. Elena was moved to a beautiful set of rooms on the 2nd floor, overlooking the garden. Large windows, morning light, lavender. She would not return to the staff quarters. She would not be referred to as the maid. When a capo new to the inner circle asked Marco who the woman in those rooms was, Marco looked at him for a beat. "Family," he said, and returned to his work. 3 months after the shooting, Valerius was passing Elena's open door when he stopped. He hadn't meant to look in, but the sound made him stop. Leo's voice reading aloud from a book of stories. Steady and clear. Elena was propped against her pillows, eyes bright, a soft smile at the edges of her face. Her hand rested lightly on Leo's head as he read. Just resting. Present. The boy turned a page, kept reading. The afternoon light lay across the room like something earned. Valerius stood in the doorway and didn't announce himself. He had built an empire, controlled a city, commanded men and ended careers with a word. And none of it had given him what a maid and a boy had built in the quiet spaces between his orders. The mansion had been frozen for a long time. 3 gunshots had cracked that ice open and let something through. It was warmth. Inconvenient, unearned, irreducible. It was, finally, home. If this story hit you somewhere real, if the loyalty, the betrayal, the slow thaw of a man who forgot how to be human moved something in you, press that like button and subscribe. We tell stories about what people carry, what they sacrifice, and who they become when the truth finally surfaces. Ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments, at what moment did you realize Ricardo was the real traitor? When did the truth click for you? We'll be watching. Until next time, stay watchful.